Well, good day there. Well, good day. Good day there. Welcome to a brand new episode of Confessions of an Artist. In this episode, we are going to be breaking down the story behind the guitar solo at Point Addis, which I have just uploaded for you all to enjoy. This was just a quick sort of summary before we get into the nuts and bolts. This was recorded live on location at a location near the famous Bells Beach. If you drive just past Bells Beach, there's another lookout point and overlooking beautiful cliffs and ocean, and it's a fantastic lookout point. And this place in particular where we were shooting was called Point Addis. And yeah, it's a fantastic location. And yeah, I'm not going to say much more about the location until we get into the other sort of behind the story videos for the next little bits and pieces. This one, I want to focus on why this particular one is important for me, why I chose to perform this particular piece, the recording behind it, how I approached that kind of thing. So this Fear of Consciousness is part of my album, and it is the final track on this journey that you go through in the album. And there is a guitar solo section halfway through the piece. And originally I started working on this, I was going to do something very similar, because the song on the album features this beautiful gem right here. The Epiphone, I've had this for a while. The one main thing I love about this is how heavy it is. As you can tell, it is solid inside, and it has one of the best, classic rock sounds. And that's why I love it the most. It really has a very unique sort of rock and roll grit sound. And that's why I use it in the studio version. And you can tell when we talk about the studio version that it is not the most sort of, complex guitar solo. I wanted to go for more a melodic, catchy, I guess you could say. For me, the performance or the way I write guitar solos, they, have to work with the piece of music. In some ways, they write themselves, because I feel that, each piece has its own particular way to write the guitar solo. And that's also dependent on the type of instrument that you're using. I've talked about this before. Different guitar, I believe it's in blogs, the Underdog blog. Different types of guitars give different tones and textures. So that's why I knew that the first thing I wanted to do was switch guitars, and I went for my Ibanez, which I've only had for the past few years. I've never had a Floyd Rose system that incorporates that sort of lock-in system for the tuning. So this was great. It's great to just experiment with something like that. I know that some people like it, some people don't. I'm pretty cool with it. It takes a bit of time to just get the tuning and stuff like that. But I love the capabilities of it. I wouldn't say that it's the be-all and end-all. It serves a particular purpose for me. It serves a particular style of playing that I can only really do on that style of guitar, compared to the more classic sort of Les Paul style guitars and the sort of Fender Strat type bodies. For me, when you watch the performance, you can see that you can see how flexible the Ibanez can be. You can really go to town on it, and it's because of that Floyd Rose system. If you're not familiar with what the Floyd Rose system is, essentially you are able to lock in your strings and tuning and allow the mechanism so you can bend the strings, essentially like, a whammy bar, like on the Fender Strats that they have. But what a common, issue that, for example, Jimi Hendrix would have when he was using, the whammy would be that it could go out of tune from time to time, right? Wait, did Jimi Hendrix use the whammy bar? I'm pretty sure he did. Pretty sure he did. But anyway, a common thing that can happen with that just standard sort of setup is that you use the whammy bar on the extension of the guitar, and then the guitar can go out of tune. The Floyd Rose system is supposed to prevent that, and it's supposed to allow you to really go crazy and to allow you to do that sort of heavy, attenuation and detuning of the strings and maintain the tuning that you've had. And from a general sort of maintenance perspective, it's supposed to keep the general tuning for longer, right? So I find that when I set up the Ibanez tuning with that system in place, I don't have to, tweak it every 2 seconds. On, Les Paul and stuff like that, basically every time you use it, you want to just, check things are in place. Generally speaking, I do that anyway, particularly on the acoustics. But it's just nice if you're, struggling to fit everything in a particular day, and you want to just pick something up. Chances are it's going to be in tune, the Ibanez. And that helps. It really helps sometimes not having to think about it. After doing it constantly, it gets annoying after a while. So that's a nice feature, I have to say. Look, some of the downsides, some of the common sort of things that people sort of disagree with them, that it does make your playing easier, it does make it easier to maneuver around, and the technical abilities on the Fender to use the whammy bar and keep the strings in tune does require a little more skill. Definitely, 100% true. But I feel that the Fender has its own particular place and the texture that it needs. For something like this, as you can see in the performance, when I'm doing tapping over the hands, I'm really lifting the guitar, pulling it back, really going to town on it. For me, that style of playing, that almost entertainment factor playing, the Ibanez is really good. And you can see this with Steve Vai, the way he plays really has that finesse and extravagance in the playing. And that system, the way that the guitar is designed, really helps keep the guitar in tune and keep it when you have these crazy moments. Another thing is that when you have this sort of block bolt basically structure. Actually, one second. Wait 1 second. Okay, so I actually wasn't expecting to have so many practical objects in this video. But as you can see, hopefully this is cut off, but it's lower than my head. So here, these you have screws essentially here, and they lock in this section here. And then the back here, we can see that it has a cutaway. In the back here, we have springs, and essentially this section is locked in with here, and we can really go to town with it until I break the string. But it's okay. I've been needing to replace these strings anyway. I haven't been playing this one in weeks because I need to change the strings. But essentially, we're able to really go to town, bend it down and bend it up, etc. with the whammy bar. And the reason I mention this, I'm showing you, is that with that sort of, with that system in place, it really helps for me when I was in that situation. It helped with the temperature, helped with the cold, because I had everything ready to go. But when we were filming the first 3 quarters of the the DJ set, the mixing portion of the Point Addis mix, this was just sitting on the sidelines. And when we got there, it was 5-ish. So I was sitting there for a few hours, and the temperature was changing. Now these live beings, the guitars, and they can be quite sensitive to temperature changes, right? So if it goes from super hot to super cold, etc. Thankfully, they don't have, like a crazy difference in temperature, but it started getting quite cold, which I didn't foresee. it was, I would say, maybe around 15, 16. It wasn't a super hot day at Celsius. And then by the end of the night, it got to about, 1, 2, 3 degrees, and it was windy. And the first thing, because I wanted to do it at night with the lights, that was the first thing I didn't I didn't think about, was that it's gonna be quite windy and it's gonna be quite cold as well. Let me just put this here a second. Put a bit of a corner here. And that's something that, it was my first time, filming on location. And you practice getting the, performance ready. And you don't really think about it, and you just sort of go there and that was one of the things that I didn't, really calculate. I was so focused on getting the performance and the mix and everything. And when we got to the point where we had to, film this guitar solo, it was pretty bloody cold. Thankfully, we had just finished, like I mentioned, about 3/4 into the DJ set, so I was a little bit warmed up. But by the time we set up all the lights and everything, I had, started getting pretty cold and chilly, and I was, getting the guitar. I didn't really actually get the guitar set up. I was helping with the lights, moving things, trying to see what we can do, and I was setting up the amp, because I didn't do this one through, a synthetic amp or, like a plugin. I used a proper Marshall amp, which I have another practical object to bring in. I forget how heavy this bloody thing is. Oh boy. Okay, so I've had this sucker for a bloody long time. Hopefully you can see this. But I have this bad boy I've had this a long time. And as you can see, I've taken pretty good care of it. I mean, it's only really seen, the sort of, studios, so it's had a few gigs and stuff like that over the years. Well, it's seen a good amount of this and that, but I've done my best to keep pretty good care of it. When you put in the car, put something over it, etc. So it's doing pretty good. But the reason I wanted to bring this up was that in the background, which you can't see unfortunately, is this monster. And the way I like to record amplifiers is very standard. For this one, I had a mono signal, so one signal on this sort of cliff edge. So we have the comb here, which a 50 size watt comb, which is absolute monster. And if we gently put our hands here, like I am like now, we brush our hands across, we can see and feel, that there is a slight change, right? So this is where the comb, the speaker is, and this is where the cabinet is, right? So the whole speaker doesn't take up the whole space here. It's a certain portion with the cabinet around it. So what I like to do is either see where the comb is or just feel it with my hands, and I will place the microphone, which was a SM57, standard microphone to use particularly for guitars, because of the ability to really take high voltage. It's just an absolute savage. You can just there's a reason why it's a go-to for live performances, for recording and stuff, because it just works. So standard approach for recording amplifiers. Put it on that sort of cusp of where the cone and the cabinet is. And for me, I find that placing it, do I have it somewhere? I'm sure I have everything in one place, but it's been a bit chaotic in the studio. I bought a wind sort of blocker that's designed for the 57s. A black sort of, essentially looks like an ice cream cone, slightly rectangular. And I put that over the 57 and then place that onto that sort of corner of where the cabinet and cone of the microphone is. And that usually gives me the best sort of representation of what I want in the sound. I find that if I place it directly in the center of the whole speaker. It doesn't really give me the most accurate representation of what I want. I find it when I put here on the sort of cusp, it gives me a good sort of, you can imagine that on the sides, so the speakers blowing out, we allow a lot of the energy and sort of the air, I should say, to come through, allow most of it through, and we get the best possible, sound of what I'm looking for, of the performance that I'm looking for, rather than just, the air of the speaker coming through. This is much more practically example of this would be in the drums, right? So when I'm recording drums, I never place them, directly of where the, horizontally based, vertically against the horizontal drum. If we have, the snare, we never place it directly like this, because we let, someone hits it, all that air is going to come through, and you're not really going to get the best recording one, because everything's going to hit it. So placing it on an angle, like a 45-degree angle, so we allow some of the air to not really hit, but we're getting the cleaner recording of what we want there. So allowing the good amount of just noise and rumble to cut away, and we record on a slight angle. And plus also with that, we in some ways shielding the microphone from really getting all this sort of initial sort of dynamic impact from the snare hit. And that's why we have multiple different microphones, at the bottom, the top, etc. You can do like you can do a stereo image as well on the top. You can have your overheads as well, which is really cool. And the root mics sometimes also help, especially when you crush them and you distort them heavily. They can also create some additional support for the snare, because the snare is quite dynamic, and generally in a room sound you'll get a lot of obviously the wash from the cymbals and stuff like that. But if you place them well enough with the overheads, you can get a good sort of room sound. And if you place them well enough, then you can also get a good space of where the snare can fit. But anyway, that's getting off topic. How that makes sense. My perspective of recording is a little bit sort of counterintuitive. I really like to experiment. I don't really feel there's sort of hard and fast rule of where to place microphones. It's really about picking the microphones for that particular drum. And if you have the ability to pick and choose and really test different ones out, Al Schmidt, the legend recording engineer, really emphasizes that picking the right microphone, really testing things out and seeing how things can work is the better approach, right, than just picking the go-to microphones because that's what you use, right? In this approach, particularly when you're recording live, I knew that one thing I did account for was the wind, right? So I knew that I didn't have the luxury to place the microphone further away from the cabinet, so I had to place it quite close, wind protector on it, at so the position that we just talked about, and that would give me the best possible chance to get the most accurate replication of what I am hearing, right? So anytime we are recording something, we want to get the best representation of what our ears hear. Microphones are very unnatural, but it's the only way at the moment that we have of really capturing sound and what we hear. And for me, it's all about capturing the most accurate representation of what I hear. And for me, that position at that moment worked the best. Now, another thing is when you are on a tight budget, you are your time is not your friend here, and you only have 1, 2. I think that we managed to get 3 takes in, but the first 2 were just rubbish. I just wasn't happy with them, and thankfully the third take is the one that sealed the deal. But yeah, so the cold was definitely something that I wasn't expecting. And the biggest issue with it being 1, 2, etc. was that it was very difficult to get warmed up, and I didn't have time to get warmed up. I was, like I mentioned, I was helping out, getting the lights sorted out, setting up the amps, setting up the equipment, the computers, recording stuff, making sure that the signal's coming through. There's a lot of other things that I was doing behind the scenes. And I wasn't really thinking about it until I picked up the guitar. And I was like, shit, I can't feel my hands. So you can imagine, the crew's ready. I've got everything set up. I've got the amp, got the microphone. It's all ready to go. But I can't feel my hands. It's getting so cold and it's windy. I'm slightly nervous as well. It's my first time recording something like this out, in the middle of nowhere. It's super dark as well. I only have like 3 lights that are giving us some sort of representation of what's going on. And in that moment, I really started freaking out. But thankfully, all my years of martial arts training really helped, push me to sort of block that and just focus on what we needed to do. The second thing that really helped was I had practiced it, over and over and over and over again. So I really knew what I wanted to play. The challenging part was having the feel of it. Now we talk about, no excuses and you got to toughen up and push through it and blah, 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 blah. And that's all cool, yeah? But it's different when you can't feel your hands, you can't feel your fingers. And when you are playing the guitar, it's really important to be able to feel what you're playing. So you can imagine, my hands are, shaking and they're really cold. And to the point that they suddenly get numb because it isn't a super long performance, it's relatively quick. And then I don't have much time to get warmed up. I have no time actually to do a sort of warm up or anything. We've got to get it going because we have the last sort of section of the DJ set to finish. And at this point, you can see, pitch black. And, so like 8, 9, and, so, yeah. But, somehow I managed to get the take that I was happy with. And interesting enough, that solo is half improvised. It's actually not what I had originally intended. I just sort of shot from the hip. And I had, that rough outline, and I wanted to play so desperately what I had, but I couldn't feel my fingers. So I really just had to basically, just sort of have that sort of fuck it moment and just go for it. So the first take that we did, I was like, yeah, it's a bit rushed, and I wasn't able to really get the attenuation, the right pitch that I wanted in certain bands. And I was like, bloody hell. So I was like shaking my arms, like put my hands underneath my shirt, trying to get warmed up. And I started, then I put the guitar down, did a few like circles and trying to get the blood flowing. So we came back, it was a little bit better, but it was still wasn't really in that pocket. And then I just started getting angry. I was like, I can't believe this. I worked so long to get this going, and what's happening right now? I should have done this earlier when we just got there, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff that goes through your mind. And yeah, I don't know, somehow, the seas parted and we were just able to get that, magical take that I was happy with. And luckily it was the third time the charm. And when we finished, I was like, I wasn't even I was sort of like, yeah, let's, cool, yeah, right, cool. And I was pissed. I was like, yeah, it's okay. It still wasn't 100% of what I wanted, but I knew that it was just gonna be, that was it. If I kept doing them, it wouldn't have been that. You would have started feeling the tension, the anger, the frustration, and I didn't want that. I wanted to be just, relaxed in the approach, but a fluid in the pocket. And yeah, so I'm hoping that that's what comes across. Yeah. So yeah, there you go. That's a bit of a sort of the picture of how it was. And then obviously I'm wearing the jacket and stuff like that, so that helped give me a bit of warmth. But again, I didn't practice it with the suit jacket on. So these are things that later I was like, oh, okay, this is something that you need to. So I've been just staring at the guitar. This is something that you need to look into when you are, wanting to do, rehearsals. The best approach is to make it as close as to how it's gonna be on that moment. So if you think it's gonna be super bright, then roll up the shades. Try, if you can, go and practice outside in your backyard. And wear exactly what you're gonna wear, at that moment, or do it exact moment of that time, if it's at 8 p.m., 7 p.m., whatever, try and perform it at that so you get used to those conditions. And if you are performing it really late at night, wait for it to get cold and then go out there and practice. So you get familiar with those conditions, what to expect. And that only helped when we continued later and did other stuff. I came prepared, and had warmers and like fingers and stuff like that. Still, it is, I would say that recording live instrumentation on location is one of the most challenging things as a musician to do. I feel that it's more difficult than performing, with an audience live at a particular venue. When you are on location somewhere, like a cliff somewhere, it's just unpredictable, and you can't control the wind. You can't control how hot it's going to be, if it's going to start raining, if it's XYZ. And the most challenging thing is constantly staying warm, and keeping warmed up, keeping your hands fresh, even your vocals, and performing. And you're performing on the decks. It's challenging to stay sort of warm. When you're DJing stuff, you can move around and jump, and there's a lot of things happening. But something like this, it's a lot more. There's less movement, and you're not as comfortable. Not the way I play when I'm sitting in my studio here. It obviously is always going to be a little bit better than how it's going to be when you're performing, on location somewhere. So that's why my approach is, okay, you got to. If you think it's good, you gotta make it even better, because it's never gonna be as good as the way you play it. So you're always gonna make sure you can play it like with your eyes closed, basically, because unfortunately it's never gonna be as good as the way you're doing in the studio. It's always gonna be different, not necessarily worse, but it's always gonna be slightly different than what you had in mind. You just have to accept that. The next thing is the wah pedal. So not the whammy bar, like we talked about, right? It's two different things. You have the whammy bar, which sort of detunes, or it can attenuate, the pitch of the strings and then the whole, sort of guitar tuning. And the wah pedal, specifically the Crybaby here. I've had this again for, as long as I can remember. I broke the back of it, so it's seen somewhere. But this is actually a signature Jimi Hendrix wah pedal. As you can see, hopefully it's my squeaky ass chair. Yeah, you can see that. Yeah, but thankfully all I do is just I put a new battery in here and put the tape over it, and it's ready to go. Why do I use this over other ones? First off, I'm gonna laugh at this, but it's the size. It is quite a decent size wah pedal. It has a good amount of weight to it, so it's very sturdy, which I really like. So I can really put it down in a certain place, and it's gonna stay there. It's not gonna move around. Secondly, and obviously more important, is the electronics. Like many know, Jimi Hendrix was an absolute pioneer of creating these crazy sounds and signal distortions, and the way he incorporated different pedals and effects into his performances was groundbreaking at the time. And you can see, decades later, how groundbreaking it was. And with this being an authentic sort of Jimi Hendrix, modeling, it has a great grit to it, and it just there's noise, there's dirt, and for me, my style, the way I like to make music and record, that to me is heaven. I love that the dirt. the crackling sounds, it just, for me and my style, it's a great addition to my playing, particularly as well because I'm not a fan of excessive amounts of outboard gear. I'll have this and a tuner. I have a whammy pedal. The red, I think it's called the whammy pedal. I have it somewhere. It's around. It's somewhere around. I use that from time to time. I use it on some of the recordings, but most of the time I just plug it into the amp or one of the sort of synthetic amps, the plugins, modules that are available to us now, just because of the flexibility and ease that they give us. And that's really it. I'm a more sort of purist, I guess you could say, in terms of the way I like to perform and play. The one thing that I do like though is in post, I will add, some delays, reverb, stuff like that. But they're more just slight textures of what I like to do. But I think that brings me well into the sort of last sort of thing I want to talk about, and that is this bloody chair. That is the sort of post sort of production editing stuff that I did. One thing you notice in this performance is that it's one fluid take, right? So we are using a few different cameras, but they're all continuous. It's not like a hard edit of like different parts of the 3 different takes, right? It's just one full take of the performance. So it's just one take of that performance, and then it's different angles, that camera. So we had one handheld camera. I didn't believe there was a secondary camera. It was just a tripod. I don't think there was a third camera. I can't remember 100%. But those are 2 main cameras, right? And then during the editing, we just sort of switch between those 2 cameras and perhaps a third one. But anyway, we're switching between the different cameras continuously for that one performance. And that for me is the way I like to approach filming. I am a big fan of the John Wick series. I took inspiration from that in the way that they film, the way that it's one fluid sequence on different cameras. It's not just like a million different cutscenes. It's just let the action sequence move fluidly through, and you can switch between different cameras. So that's my approach to performing. And not only that, but the age now where we have AI, etc., it really puts your musicianship and your ability on just display. And it's the only way you can't fake it, right? Because you don't have different cutscenes, you can't switch between a million different takes. It's that performance and that's it. Another thing is, the backing track doesn't have any guitar in it. It's just a raw backing track. All I've done is just take out the guitar solo from the actual song, and you're hearing the drum performance, the live drum performance in there, and the background, so soundscape and production I have for that song. So all I've done is just taking out the stem of the guitar performance and the effects, stuff like that around that performance, and left everything else. So nothing's helping support the guitar performance here. So what you're hearing is a mono live take, one full guitar performance done on location through a live amp. In terms of post-production, stuff like that, my vision for what I wanted to do was create more of a sort of 70s sort of grungy sort of, take inspiration from the 90s sort of grunge stuff and take it back to like the 70s and incorporate a bit of a sort of Jimi Hendrix sound in there, particularly because I was using the wah-wah pedal. It already has some of that sound in there. So I'm hoping that you can appreciate some of the textures in there, because I was going for that more sort of vintage sort of guitar solo sound, that sort of Led Zeppelin sort of vibe, or there's a lot of dirt and crunch in the performance, and incorporating some more modern aspects with some delays and reverbs and stuff like that. I wouldn't say I went like super crazy onto town on it. One thing I will say is that the recording that I had, unfortunately, wasn't like the most incredible recording, because I obviously pick up a little bit of wind and stuff like that. And one thing that I had to also take into consideration was the volume that I had. It wasn't as loud as I would I've loved the recording to be. So I had to obviously increase a little bit of the loudness. Then obviously brought up a little bit of noise floor. So it was a bit of tweaking, a little more than I would have liked. Let's put it that way. A little more than I would have liked. As I go back to this, I am a bit of a purist. The less I can manipulate the sound, for me, is better, right? The more I have to do to a particular sound to get what I want, just shows to me that I haven't recorded the best take, okay? And that's something I need to work on, right? So the less stuff I need to do in post means that the recording was done a lot better. But look, it's every time I do it, particularly, when you watch, or as we progress and I share with you more and more stuff, you see that my recording on location stuff gets better and better and better. But, I'm not saying that it wasn't a good recording. I'm just saying that from my perspective, after that, I would have liked it to be a little bit cleaner, a little bit sharper, a little bit louder, just so I would have to have done less manipulating in the background, because I would have preferred to give you even more pure side of the performance. Adding a few delays here and there, some reverb, stuff like that, it's fine. But when I have to sort of adjust for the wind, then obviously the natural acoustics and reverbs and stuff like that, and really try and get the best possible out of it. One of the great things about recording something live is that there's only so much you can do to it, which I love. When you are recording something digitally, through the plugins, you'll always have that sort of clean, before you add distortion, before you put it through like a guitar plugin, you always have that clean direct signal. And that's a bit of a cheat. It's like a cheat code. When you record something like this and you're distorted, and it's already distorted, there's only so much you can do. So that's a plus. But for me, to be able to just record, put it in and put some delay and reverb, and there you go. Awesome. That's enough for me. The fact I had to tweak with it a little bit more and add some warmth and take out a little bit of adjust with filters and stuff like that to compensate for some of the wind and stuff like that. It is what it is, and you just have to work with the take that you have and do the best you can to deliver the best possible product and still have that vision that you want in mind. So with that all in mind, I think it turned out pretty good. I'm very happy with how it all came about, and with everything that I've mentioned, the conditions and the obstacles that we had to overcome. I'm very happy with the final take and the image and the way it looks, and when the wind blows slightly and with the jacket moving and stuff. I think it's really cool. It's very cinematic and it adds nice drama to the performance. But yeah, it symbolizes for me in terms of the importance of the piece. It's the first time I've done a guitar solo like live like this, or with a crew filming like this. So that was really important. The last thing I would like to say is that for me, this is the way I like to approach if I'm incorporating live instrumentation, is separate yourself from the DJ equipment. It's much better to have a performance on the guitar be its own thing, right? Rather than sort of standing in front of the decks, or on the side, or while you're DJing somehow trying to do something. That to me is disrespectful to mixing, to DJing. And I think that it goes too far, right? It's cool to incorporate instrumentation, but let it be its own thing, like a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but let it be its own thing, right? Have 30, 40 minutes of your DJ set. And then slow things down and just present the guitar. You have a piece of music or something that you want to present that particular instrument in. Just like we do vocally, right? We step away and we present vocally what we want for 3, 4 minutes, right? We don't just step out and do something vocally for like a half a minute and then jump back. So yeah, I would just, that's my approach anyway. I like to have respect for the different instrumentation And if I'm mixing, we're mixing. If we're playing for a particular time. Then we put that instrument down and we get back to what we're doing. Trying to do both. Yeah. Not for me. Not for me. Anyway, so thank you so much for watching. I hope that gives you a bit of a better insight into the sort of behind the scenes and the story behind this piece and how it came about. As you'll see when you listen to the full song, it's quite different from the original studio version. We went pretty wild on this performance, but it just shows you that when it's a different guitar, when it's a different instrument, it's a different type of solo. You can really go crazy with it. And for someone like me, I don't like playing it the same thing, exactly. I like changing it up. It's really that particular piece is for that moment, right? And when you're playing it live, have elements of it, but then just go crazy with it and see what we can do. I feel that if I did this performance in the studio version, it wouldn't have really worked. It's its own thing. At the same token, the studio piece, the guitar solo, it's its own magic. It's its own space within the whole piece. It works for that piece. This works for that little section of what you want to present. But yeah, there you go. So yeah, I hope that gives you a really good sort of breakdown into this performance, and look forward to sharing you more of the stories and sort of behind the scenes of how it all came about. So yeah, this performance will always hold a very special place for me. Obviously, you always remember your first, and yeah, I mean you always remember the first one. So this is the first one, and I'll always remember it. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I will catch you on the next one. Oh yeah, I'm sorry if I wasn't paying super close attention to the the camera. It's difficult. I'm trying to think and staring at all these lights and the camera. But anyway, yeah, I'm trying to give you the most my confession, as it will. Alright, I'll catch you on the next one.